Welcome to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. I'm Dr. Gary Irwin Kenyon. I created this series as a follow-up to my book, Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, which is available on Amazon, Indigo, and Friesen Press, and in audiobook form from Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. In this series of episodes, I am in conversation with my friend and colleague, Bill Randall. We explore pathways, or what Thomas Moore calls in another episode of this podcast, meanderings of our personal and collaborative journey with the metaphor of life as a story, and the wonderful adventure that is possible if you are open to following your bliss. In this fourth episode, Bill Randall and I explore our visions of the future. I think at this point, I'd like to continue and talk about what each of us has as a vision for the future. I guess first of all, we've already talked about adding some other podcast episodes to this where we may go into some more detail on certain topics, like possibly some of the terms and concepts that you identified earlier might make a very interesting podcast episode, just giving more detail of that. I'll start by talking a little bit about my vision for the future, and then you could do the same. I think for me, the journey or the passion for the metaphor of journey and story continues on. I've moved with my book, Pathways to Stillness, I've moved into, I guess you could say, a less academic style of writing, storying style, and I've written that book for everyone, for all of us. So there are short chapters and guidelines how to explore your own life story, with a lot of the themes that we've already talked about sprinkled in the book in kind of more of talking with someone rather than the academic work tends to be talking to someone, which is fine. That's just another way of expressing storying style. But I've moved more in that direction with Pathways to Stillness. And the other thing I mentioned quickly about Pathways to Stillness and the narrative matters, that my vision for the Pathways to Stillness podcast is that it's not just gerontology. It's about stories, lives, pathways, and finding meaning and stillness in your life. So it's very appropriate, I think it's wonderful to have initiatives and narrative matters broadens out the topic from gerontology, and I think that's really what I had in mind with Pathways to Stillness. So meaning and journey and end of life are still topics that are fascinating with me. Writing about more stillness stories and exploring my pathway. Collaborations, it's a learning more about social media. Podcast collaborations with former students like we've done with Person-Centered Universe. With yourself, the collaborations that we continue to do. Thomas Moore, who you actually initiated that by the Milwaukee conference where he attended, and one step led to the other where you kindly gave him a copy of my book and he liked it, and we ended up having him on several other episodes in this podcast series. If you're interested, Thomas Moore, who wrote Care of the Soul, among many other books. So that's something for me. I'm continuing to learn little by little more about how to use social media for expanding and sharing my insights. I guess more personally, I have the interest to make what I call soul connections with people, to be more and more aware of who I'm speaking to, whether it's walking along the street these days with a mask on, to just look at someone and pay attention, try to get a connection eye to eye in presence. I think that's such a rich experience for us as human beings. We can't hug right now very much, but we can, even in a gaze or a short conversation, how are you today, in the grocery store, along the street. I really try more and more to be aware of that, and I think the need for that has been increased significantly with the pandemic. And you could also see it as a positive outcome of the pandemic, that more and more people are realizing that we need each other. We really need each other as human beings. we need to listen more to each other's stories and be with each other more. So that's something that I have an interest in. Of course, seeking more stillness in my own life is an ongoing journey. My Tai Chi, which is another passion I mentioned before, I continue to get insights through that, and that is enriching my story and my journey. And I guess I'll just end with, as we've asked other speakers, what would your advice be for people coming behind you and interested in their journey? And I would say the advice is to try to follow your heart or your soul or your passion. We all need to eat and pay the bills, and so you can't forget that. But don't give up on the dreams. Don't give up on the following what you find you're drawn to. And Thomas Moore talks about this in his talks on the series as well. But just not be afraid to follow it, not really knowing where it's going to end up. Because I believe it's really true what Buddhists and others say, that the journey it's really about the journey, not the destination. It's our sincerity and our interest and our passion that in some ways is fulfilling in itself. You mentioned creativity and humor as one of your topics for teaching. And I think when we're involved in any creative activity, we are in stillness. We are in the present moment. And we have the feeling that nothing more needs to be done. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it nothing to do and nowhere to go. That everything is okay as it is. And that's fulfilling in itself, regardless of where the end or how successful. I sometimes really don't like that word successful too much. It's more about getting meaning out of the process of being on your journey. So I'd say never give that up is a good recipe for not having the what ifs or regrets in your life as life gets further on. And we have talked about that possibly being a topic we would go into in more detail in the future. So that's my vision of the future. And what would yours be, Bill?
Well, you've said what you've said very well. I agree with much of that. The attention to the little everyday encounters that we have with fellow human beings, whether we know them or not. And I like the concept that Gary Zukav mentions in his book Soul Stories about blessing everybody, not in the kind of religious sense necessarily, but being a blessing to and finding something in each person that you interact with, whether it's at the grocery store or at the coffee shop or wherever it might be, something, that say something or smile or whatever that will in some way communicate that you care about them, that you're supportive of their development and so forth. And those little things are really, really important. So the older I get, the more I like to think little as opposed to think big and to focus on the details. I do feel that whatever we call the cosmic energy that runs through all things, it wants us to attend to the details and to the little opportunities to express caring for one another and support one another's positive story development. But in the short term, I've got a couple of projects I'm wrapping up that indicate kind of where my own thinking is taking me. One is a book called Once Upon a Time, Tales for the Second Half of Life, which I've written with a couple of colleagues in Texas. We meet every Thursday via Zoom to have our meetings as to how things are going, but we hope to have found a publisher where we look at fairy tales, parables, fables, little stories that we remember hearing or having read to us as kids and revisiting them as 60-plus-year-olds and seeing what we can get out of those stories. So that's another way of exploring spirituality and meaning making in later life and engaging in the process of life review. Another project that hoping we can wrap up with our CERN team is Things That Matter. That's our working title. Things That Matter, Resilience, Reminiscence, and the Role of Special Objects in the Stories of Our Lives, which has been a fascinating project that we hope the University of Toronto Press will agree to go forward with. But me personally, I've been gathering notes and notes and notes and reading widely, including this book, one of the more recent books by Thomas Moore called Ageless Soul, The Lifelong Journey Toward Meaning and Joy. Getting a lot out of that. That's helping me to formulate some ideas that I want to get into maybe a book form on aging as adventure, shifting the thinking about aging as some sort of tragedy of losses and deficits that, hopefully we can figure out how to stop or solve, and seeing aging as a journey, which is your metaphor, of discovery and learning and growth, an adventure, in other words. And that's kind of my personal mission these days, is to try to get that across, again, for a more general audience. I don't want to write books and articles that talk to people, but rather talk with people, and with lots of stories and illustrations, because in my book, In Our Stories Lies Our Strength, people are telling me that that's what really helps them to get the concepts, is the stories and the illustrations and the personal tone. So I think this is a time for us, as it is for people like Thomas More, has been all along, to write from the heart and to, draw upon the ideas that excite our heads and our minds, but to express them in a heartful way that can connect with other people's hearts and hopefully affect positive changes in their own experience of their process of aging. So that's part of our common mission of taking narrative gerontology to the streets.
A good way to pause, I think. I want to thank you for this wonderful adventure of this series that we've been sharing, and to be continued. And probably this is a good place for us to, as I say, pause and look forward to more conversations of this nature with you, Bill. Thank you so much, as my dear friend and colleague.
Right back at you.
Thank you for listening to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. My book, Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, is available on Amazon, Indigo Chapters, and Friesen Press. It is also available in audiobook form from Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.